So this project concerns itself with the safety of the whole. Distancing itself from the Anthropocene, it attempts to grapple with the currently separate conditions of the human and the other than human, seeking to reconcile these two almost opposing forces within the framework of residential and suburbia. It examines this division and the aspects which remain separate and which can and should coexist. As the basis of my regulation, I've interrogated the Res Code and found that the document itself contains many interesting and overall beneficial points. Where it fails instead is to be found in its application. When applying the code, the regulations are bartered and compromised, seeking satisfaction but nothing beyond that. As opposed to being the minimum, it is the goal, the stopping point. The bot was initially fed information about safety within community, which returned concepts of the environment, open space, sustainability, and adaptation. Feeding both research and prompts of these concepts back into the bot produced outputs of the landscape, defining what landscape is, the void, internal and external spaces. This ultimately led to topics of redefining the balance of human inhabitants against nature, parkland, and the wild. The bot acted as another voice, a person to have a conversation with, and as a filter which was progressively built up as an embodiment of the new Res Code with all its influences. Although the link between community safety and the concepts of further integration with nature may seem direct, the use of the bot allowed a journey through the nuance, influences, and supplementary concepts such as the element of control, adaptation, void, or specific formal approaches. The resultant regulation is a rewilding of the existing Maribyrnong Res Code. It disassembles and overgrows, keeping aspects of it while integrating it into the new landscape. It seeks to extend it to push its goals further, accepting the inherent nature of the minimum as a stopping point and making some regulation more vague to invite innovation, but also some more specific to force certain outcomes which promote the safety of the ecosystem and thus ourselves included. Based on existing density maps, as well as movement through the site, green corridors sprout in the abandoned, retaking and rewilding the landscape. Rather than a grid of blocks and streets, a network of built-in habitats, almost like constellations, removes the idea of the human as central and places the house as just another node in a system. The design outcomes are inspired by existing architecture which are tweaked to suit the new Res Code. Placed onto the site representing the different scales and densities of built, these provide a precedent for further architects and developers of the site to refer to when creating new environments which engage with the landscape appropriately, according to the rewilded Res Code. This low-density proposal is placed within the dispersed areas of the master plan, with neither green corridor nor significant built density. It is a single residence and one node in a network of both human and other than human inhabitation. Key to this is the multiple levels of interior, the gradient of separation between internal and external, the blurring of the enclosed human-centric and the open space. Throughout the building, the floor level, the roof, the height of rooms, and the walls change in porosity and openness, gradually bringing the exterior into the typically sheltered interior. The floor plan shows how this division relates to program. The living spaces have the greatest degree of openness. The kitchen is semi-open, and the bedrooms and bathrooms are the most enclosed. The understory has a height of less than half a meter, allowing small animals to pass through, but the floor slabs of the enclosed programs extrude through this into the ground, creating a deliberate separation between the inhabitant and animal. The posts spread throughout this level mimic the surrounding bushland and trees. Following the idea of openness, there is no formal entry. Instead, the circulation is entirely free through both axes of the building, with the dining room as the focal point. Moving from the dining room towards the living room, the space compresses sharply between two walls, and the overhead walkway rapidly expands outwards, ending in an open semicircle deck. This gives uninterrupted views out of the building, but also pushes the living room outside and gives views into the building. The nodes for animal inhabitation are placed at a comfortable distance from human inhabitation, placed at equal hierarchy and balance in terms of dispersal and density. This takes away ownership of the land from the human and instead positions it as shared environment for both. This medium density proposal is a 3-story multi-residence building. This primarily plays with the degrees of privacy, degrees of separation, and the interaction of human inhabitation with green courtyards and the external environment. In particular, focusing on the aspect of journey, connection, and community generated through the circulation. Key to this sense of journey is the circulation which flows through all axes of the building, front to back, left to right, and top to bottom, and how this takes the highest priority. This circulation, as well as layout of program, takes precedence from a campsite model of inhabitants. This campsite influence is most evident through the blurring of ownership. Again, the most secluded and private spaces are the bedrooms and bathrooms. These are entirely owned by the resident, but outside of this, the degree of ownership becomes blurred. Due to proximity, certain living and kitchen spaces are intuitively or vaguely linked. However, the circulation carving between these spaces allows for strict divisions to be broken down and enable the sharing of program. For example, on the ground floor, the large kitchen adjacent to the largest community space allows for this to be easily accessed for community events. While looking at the interaction between two specific apartments, the smaller apartment only contains living and kitchen space for 1 or 2 people, whereas the larger apartment can easily support a crowd. These two become more intertwined through the sharing of semi-private spaces. There is also an element of meandering in the circulation between individual apartments. Instead of directly moving from room to room, this journey is slowed, after moving through the public circulation. Directly injected nature, atrium, or courtyard spaces break up program in somewhat of an intrusive manner. This gives it hierarchy and further prominence in the layout rather than simply using it as a background separate from interior. Furthering this hierarchy, the use of the lattice, following the same design language, and in many cases is simply a continuation of the wall, creates an element of life, change, and seasonal dynamics. In winter, the view through the framework is allowed, whereas in spring, as the climbing plants grow, the view is filtered or blocked out. This direct obstruction and close scale brings a level of intimacy from the adjacency, creating a greater awareness of inhabitants and equal hierarchy between the human and the other than human. The high density proposes a model which ties neighboring buildings together formally in a more collaborative manner. Pulling the green corridor through the forms, reshaping it to fit the new urban corridors, and eroding the forms themselves as the corridor moves through. Through combining open spaces within the dense model, larger, more expansive spaces can be developed. This idea is further pushed through the inclusion of voids inspired by geological layers beneath the site, carving through the vertical mass of the building in order to form an urban park, which mimics the surrounding landscape's hills. This presents an opportunity for new models of circulation to be introduced. Rather than direct A to B elevators, these open spaces allow a new method of traversing the high-rise typology. The circulation mimics a journey through the park, with branching paths, multiple points where it touches the ground, connecting bridges, and wide open spaces. Light wells are carved through the masses in order to provide light access to these urban parks. These open spaces provide a porosity to the built form, enabling far views through buildings, as well as access to light and greenery. Spread throughout all heights and directions of the model allows all residential floors to gain access to a view or multiple views of different parks, whilst maintaining the high density which fills pragmatic numbers and reduces the building's footprint on the site. The colored mesh reflects the context and the landscape, but also creates a dense screen between the internal and external, drawing inspiration from the interior of a possum box. This creates a greater contrast between a safe but ultimately closed-off interior against the brighter and more open exterior conditions, impelling inhabitants to live in the outdoor spaces, rather than only engaging with nature from within their sealed envelope. Additionally, the screen acts as a visual aid to help animals avoid glass and as a climbing apparatus. The green corridors run through the project from end to end, and there are boxes built into the planters which enable other than human inhabitants, as well as between the different layers of human inhabitants, space has been granted to kind of permit that extra life.